How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to talk about the correctional officer's role in rehabilitation. My guest today is Joe Paponio. We're going to talk about changes. But with that said, guys, this is where we are headed, or if not, we are there already. So it's good to try to understand where our part is in all this. And I think it's going to be a great discussion. Again, my guest is Joe Paponio. Before I bring him on, guys, don't forget I have books on the market. They're all available either on Amazon or at Blue 360 Media. The link to them are in the description. I have books from manipulation to leadership to report writing to being new, and I'm working on a daily reader now, just coming up with 365 topics for rookies. I want to make sure we kind of keep those core values in play. But with that said, guys, the link to each one of my books are in the description. So if you guys get a chance, check out those books. I'd appreciate it. And then we get Joe on. What up, Joe?
Hey, brother, what's happening?
Good. It's good to have you, Joe. You mind introducing yourself?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years and 6 months, and currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
Yes, and we love having you, Joe. You know, Joe, we kind of touched on these topics, throughout, the many years Tier Talk has been in play. And with that said, sometimes we did get some kickback, but I think that now the change has kind of been there for a while now. So I think more people are kind of getting used to where we're headed. And now it's a matter of getting them involved in where we are headed. So they may have accepted it, but are you actively involved? And I was watching something on leadership with Simon Sinek, and he mentioned something to during his interview that really stuck with me. Now, granted, I've written in my books before that most people are afraid of change because they may be concerned of what they're letting go of. And a lot of what we've discussed in the past in our shows, even in the books that I've written, are reminders of the core values that must remain in play as we evolve. And I think that's a very that's a very big part of understanding change is for people that are being involved in it. What am I letting go of? That's the ambiguity of change. But he also mentioned something that hit me as well. Was he mentioned sudden change? So I said, that's a great perspective. So people, when it comes to change, I think they are afraid of change that is sudden because, again, it's ambiguous to them. And now you're telling me I got to move forward with this, and I don't have an understanding of what this change is about. And more importantly, what am I going to lose in the process? So sudden change does have a greater impact as opposed to change that we can slowly and gradually grow into. And that's kind of why I think it's still good to revisit these topics, because I think at this point, even if change was forced upon us, there still should be some level of us gradually moving towards that change. But with that said, Joe, I mean, that makes sense, right? How maybe we are afraid of what we feel at this moment could have been sudden change.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to change, sudden change is a lot. It's a lot more harder to swallow and to deal with than a gradual change. Especially if you're a creature of habit. If you're kind of set in your ways. It's easier to take the gradual change because, you got time to get your mind wrapped around it, get time to kind of practice the process and kind of get things set in motion. Where sudden change, you're kind of forced to do a 180 right on the spot. And it's hard to do, especially for us older hands who were kind of set in our ways and really didn't like change that much. It's harder to gravitate towards that sudden change than it is for the gradual change.
Yeah, and I think that's why we did a lot of shows on this. And again, we even written the books and provided some insight to help people mitigate what in their perspective could have been sudden change. But now we're at that point where it's happened. Or if not, it's been happening for a while. And at this point, we need you guys to kind of accept it so we can move forward together, because I think with that acceptance would also come your participation, so we can make sure that the change that we have happening is balanced, because it is happening. It's happening, or it has happened. And right now, if you don't start to accept where we're headed, the problem is the change is going to be very unbalanced, because we're not going to have your participation in that change, your ideas, your needed genius from the experience of working behind the wall. And you would agree with that, Joe, right? At this point, it's not about being resistant anymore, but finding your spot and how you can participate in where we are headed.
Yeah, when it comes to change, I think the most harsh, critical, and upfront sudden change for me was the Prison Rape Elimination Act. It kind of got invoked pretty damn quick. We didn't have any time to wrap our heads around it or think about the process or how we're going to invoke it or work with it. When it comes to change, having as much lead time as possible is a good thing because you have time to get yourself and your staff prepared for what's coming. You can start practicing little things, working towards that change in its process. Whereas, the sudden change is so harsh and it just seems like it creates more havoc at first than anything because, here it is, we were doing this yesterday. Now today we're doing this. And, there's no ands, ifs, or buts. And to me, it creates more havoc than it does harmony. That's why I try to, when it comes to change, I try to gradually ease the staff into it. It's easier because you get time to think about the process. Your people get time to, think about the process. They can bring up any kind of anticipated problems that they can see in the future by creating this change. And, it's overwhelmingly just a better process than the sudden change.
I agree. And guys, the first thing I have here that I want to discuss, we have a few areas here real quick, is correctional officers' influence on inmate behavior and mindset. So automatically, we directly have influence over the inmates, usually through our interactions with them or indirectly from what they observe of us. So I think at that point, we have to be very mindful of our actions. They have to be very intentional, even when we may not be directly interacting with an inmate. Maybe we're interacting with another officer. I mean, either way, we have to be intentional with our efforts, our interactions, because if we aren't, the inmates are watching at all times and they're kind of learning what you're about. So I think the general idea here is that if you're not acting in a respectful or professional way, then they're not going to be able to, see that. And with that said, they're not going to be able to, understand, I guess who you are at that level in order to gain a positive influence with them. So this is what I wrote real quick. I said, when it comes to correctional officers' influence on inmate behavior and mindset, I said, officers shape inmates' attitudes through their actions and integrity. Modeling positive behaviors fosters growth, while cutting corners or acting corruptly reinforces negative tendencies. Demonstrating integrity and professionalism in daily interactions is very important, and also encouraging participation in positive activities. What's your thoughts on that, Joe? Would you agree with that? I think that's part of our prescribed role because it happens whether we intentionally try it or not.
Oh, yeah. And, most agencies adopted a mission statement of sorts. Everybody has the general, provide public safety, promote positive change in offender behavior, reintegrate the offender back into society, and assist the victims of crimes. Part of our prescribed role is to promote that positive change, either, in the way that they think, or whether it's giving them resources to use to kind of better themselves, to be prepared for release. It's one of our it's shifted to where it's one of the more important topics, important positions in our role than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we were just there to keep them inside the fence, make sure they behaved, at whatever cost. There really wasn't much resource for them. And then, technology comes along. And, technology kind of paved the way for the change in the way correctional officers do their jobs. It changed the way we offer resources to offenders. Like in Texas, most of our agencies now have driver license setups there where, upon release, they can actually get you a driver's license or an ID card. 20 years ago, you were just released with your inmate ID card. Technology has brought us forward so far that, Big Brother's always watching. Things that were conducted and things that were done 20 years ago are now seen on camera and not, soaked in the way that it was 20 years ago. It forced a lot more professionalism, because anything that you did was on camera or body cam and could be used or viewed. With that said, it kind of forced our hand to be more professional correctional people, employees. It made us not only do our jobs better, but also treat our employees better, deal with the offenders in a more positive, light.
I agree with you, because it brings a higher sense of accountability. I wanted to mention something, Joe, that you touched on too. I don't want to overlook this part, but we have more interaction with the inmate population than we ever did before. This is not lock them up and forget about them. So with that said, with those increased interactions, we should look to create moments where we can have some level of impact or connection. And what I mean by that too, I want you guys to know something. The control is always in staff's hands. So at no point am I telling us to compromise our role on the safety and security side, and we'll touch on that later. But having said that, we do have interactions where we could create an impact. And you want to hear something funny? Before we kind of shifted into this perspective, or into this rehabilitative model, where now safety and security still exists, still the foundation, but we have to try to balance things out. I've always saw these interactions. It's not that we've never saw positive interactions before people pushed heavily on the rehabilitative model. I've seen officers running units where, they ran it through. Hey, come on, working with the inmate to try to get them to where they need to be, maybe even making phone calls with the other professionals to see where they could create a better influence with those individuals in partnership with the programming side of things. But I've seen these interactions exist. The funny thing is, it's sad to say, but when we were kind of confused about our role, it was either, we're strictly safety and security, or we're soft. Anything as an effort to rehabilitate or help the inmate move forward at some level, you were considered soft. So usually those type of dialogues were done in the shadows. Technically, it's like, let me talk to this inmate in the shadows, because I don't want my people around me to think I'm a social worker now, and it's like, well, guys, it's all balanced work. So with that said, I think the difference now is it's more accepted. So you may actually see people step out of the shadows a bit more in their efforts to maybe calm an inmate down, especially even with the use of force changes, where now there's efforts to de-escalate, where maybe, people would have done that without being seen by their peers because they didn't want to be judged by their peers as being too soft. Maybe they thought that use of force is where we want to be, when we've clearly stated as a department that's not where we want to be. So I think the efforts and the departmental support has allowed for people to step up that are good communicators, that see that, hey, this person is tremendous at communicating. This person should be brought into positions where, we can get them up front and work with these inmates in an effort to de-escalate, or try to build a better connection between, what we're expecting now from the inmate population. But Joe, and I want people to realize this, the dialogues in which officers did try to create positive influence with the inmate population, they were always done. Trust me. I mean, if you're working in a unit, you better believe you're doing that pretty much every moment of that day. But I think now, since it's becoming more accepted, it kind of gives people a chance to maybe step up more without the fear of being judged by their peers that they're being a little too soft. Would you agree, Joe? Because I've noticed one thing in my career, and maybe you could tell me that because it could be wrong. When you had certain officers hanging out with their peers, they would be one way. But then when they're running a unit by themselves and they're in control of the dynamic of that inmate population, they would be another way. And the inmates would sense the shift. They would be like, wow, when you run a unit, you're this way. But then when you're with, your other partners, you're this way. And the inconsistency really would be based on, who the officer was surrounded by. And I guess that could have been also maybe the officer's concern of being socially accepted by their staff, believing that the expectation is not to be soft, because at one point we equated that to being soft. But to be honest with you, it's actually a skill that is very much needed, always has been needed, but now the skill is being pressured more.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had several officers, with that persona, that were hard asses on the outside, but when it come to running a unit, they were, their verbal judo took over. And, at first I thought it was kind of comical. But as I grew as a supervisor and as I, promoted up to lieutenant, I found out that, these type of officers are actually needed. I retired from a max unit, and, things were fast paced and hard all the time. We had a bunch of max custodies, but I had a female sergeant that worked for me that could walk into any pod and gain compliance. And I'm not saying her going in there and just cussing folks out and just being a total hard ass. This girl had the ability to quell just about damn near anything that she came across. And, I found that to be, people can say what they want, but, it's a useful tactic to have people that have that kind of verbal judo that can quell anything and prevent uses of forces, or, she has saved me from 18-hour days of having to do use of force paperwork. And, the older I got, the more I found I appreciated that. Now in dealing with the offenders today, especially we have a lot of mental health offenders. Mental health has just grew exponentially. It seems over the last 5 to 10 years. And, now it's being recognized more and more. So it changes our tactics in the way that we deal with offenders versus 20 years ago. There was either right or wrong. You're either going to do what I tell you, or, we'll start the use of force continuum. And, now, with part of the de-escalation tactics, is to kind of get a better picture, especially if you're working in a county jail or a city jail where, people are cycling through all the time. It's not like being in a penitentiary where, you have long-term convicts, these guys, their behaviors, their mannerisms, and, and you also know what they suffer from. So having somebody with that kind of professionalism that in that verbal judo that can go in and gain compliance from an offender without stepping out of the professional role. As much as I hate to say it, because I was stuck in my old ways, I found it to be an absolute plus.
And I want to mention, I don't want to overlook this one part of this too as well, where, hey guys, as I said, inmates are watching you at all times. They know what to expect from you, just like your peers do, just like the agency does. Trust and believe the inmates know, if not better, what you're expected to do, what you're expected to carry out. If you are ever sacrificing professionalism or your duties for convenience, and eventually, cutting corners becomes your routine, so falls into negligence, they're watching. And they're also watching when you cross into corrupt behavior, even if before you realize you're crossing into corrupt behavior. They're going to know the steps that you're going down. So with that said, to make sure that you maintain the course, no matter how hard it may be, is extremely important, because as I mentioned earlier, with who you are and who you become, you cannot hold inmates accountable for anything if you yourself are not held accountable to yourself and to the standards that's expected of you in that trusted role. If you decide to cut corners or fall for the trap of getting corrupted, or just being corrupted coming in, you are not in any position, even if it's giving good advice, you're still not in the position for that advice to be respected. There could be some good people that there could be some good advice that you're providing, but if you're not holding yourself to that same standard, inmates may play along like they're listening, but they don't respect you. They don't. Where if you hold yourself to that standard and you're professional, that advice carries a lot more weight, because the inmates could see that you're applying that advice to yourself as well. Don't be a hypocrite. What is that? Say as whatever. Someone would say as I don't do, or don't.
Do
What
as
is
I
it?
say, don't do as I do.
Yeah, yeah, you know what it is. Yeah, very hypocritical. If you want to try to pass that route with the inmate population, they'll play along with you, but they don't respect you. They don't. And eventually, what will happen is, the moment they do decide to cut corners, they'll throw that back in your face. You want to hold me accountable? Here's the shit that you do right now that I can easily throw at you. So let me live my life, and I won't bother you as you live yours. Am I lying about that, Joe?
No, not at all.
Scary. Okay, so I got the next part. This kind of relates to what we just discussed, but I just wanted to add it in because there's maybe some other areas that we could touch on. But it's pro-social modeling, empathy, and building trust. So kind of touches in, it bleeds in a little bit. Officers serve as role models we talked about through respectful and consistent behavior, showing resilience under pressure. And what I mean by that is inmates are going to test you, they're going to challenge you, and it's going to make you want to fall back somewhere, but you can't. You got to kind of keep the professional role, don't take it personal, and be resilient in that effort. That's what I mean. Empathy plays a crucial role in building trust and creating a supportive environment. And we're not talking about sympathy, we're talking about empathy in context of corrections. And demonstrating to inmates the value of compassion and understanding while maintaining your authority. And that's the key. It's balancing empathy with your prescribed role. You're not letting you're not letting sympathy draw in to the point where you wind up sacrificing your professionalism because you're more worried about preserving the relationship with the inmate or the situation, as opposed to what your prescribed role is and what your prescribed role wants you to do, what it expects you to do. And so I have treating all inmates fairly to establish a stable environment, displaying resilience to inspire constructive responses to adversity. I love that. The constructive responses to adversity, and then actively listening to address inmates' concerns with empathy and respect. Again, that doesn't mean that you're blinded by sympathy, but rather you understand where they're coming from. So in an effort, you can engage a little bit, but not to the point where you're blinded so much that you start to feel sorry for them, and that becomes a different type of management that we don't want. It kind of blurs the boundary. So empathy allows for the boundary to still exist, if you will. Joe, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you always, you got to put yourself in their shoes. If you were in their position, you would want somebody to kind of understand where you're coming from, and they don't. That's all they really ask, is that you understand their point of view. It's not that we're catering to their whims or needs, but it's okay to understand their point of view and understand where they're coming from, as long as you don't, like Anthony said, we don't fall into the sympathy role, because at some point in that sympathy role, you're going to wind up compromising yourself and your professionalism.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying, Joe, because it is about understanding where they're coming from, so then you can make a decision, even if they don't agree with it. You could still make a decision that's relevant. That matters. Like, you know what? At the end of the day, is I'm not asking for the inmate to agree with any decision I have to make, but it has to be relevant. That's the key. Relevant to the expectations of what's within our prescribed role. Because believe it or not, inmates most of the time know what you are going to do. They do know. But when they ask you a question, they're trying to kind of test your resolve in your efforts to do it. Because trust and believe, the inmates are going to ask you questions that they already know the answer to. So usually when they go to ask you a question, they're asking you a question to see if you're going to stand by what you need to do. And if they feel there's a sense of weakness, then they're going to try to manipulate by starting to ask a question to see if they can build on empathy into sympathy. So with that said, it's good what Joe said. Yeah, I'm going to understand where you're coming from, and I'll be respectful, because we do have to, I have to engage in whatever your concern is. But I also know that there's a line, and that line's not going to cross into any level of pity where now my choices get sacrificed because I'm concerned about, how my actions or my needed actions are going to make you feel. Granted, empathy will take this situation in context, but my decisions are not going to truly be defined by how it makes you feel, because it's too subjective for me to filter my decisions through. Does that make sense? Doesn't mean I'm going to do something wrong, but if I'm concerned more about how you feel about a decision that I'm going to make, then I'm pretty much asking you for permission to make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, it's okay to be empathetic and understand where they're coming from, but don't let their actions or sway you into making the decision that you normally would not or could not.
Right. Now, this next part matters. This is kind of where we're at now. It's balance and security duties with rehabilitative support. It's like officers must maintain order while supporting growth-focused programs. Tools like restorative housing combine safety, punishment, and opportunities for reflection to promote change. So again, we oversee rehabilitative programs while maintaining security, and then using restorative housing to encourage reflection and improve behavior. So I want to mention something here, Joe, is we know the world has shifted in what they view the outcome of correction should be. And yes, there is always going to be that rehabilitative side. Is what we're doing ultimately beneficial for the inmate? That's what the issue is going to be. Now, even though we know safety and security comes first, the pressure from society is going to be inmates come first. The outcome of what we're doing, how does that benefit the inmate? So granted, when we have to sell a perspective that truly is beneficial to both worlds, because if it's beneficial for staff, it is beneficial for the inmate. It may be indirect, but it's still ultimately beneficial for the inmate. So with that said, we have to make sure that when we sell certain practices that we do, that we promote all angles. So yes, I truly do believe that I hate the word solitary confinement. It's connected to that political agenda where there is no benefit to the inmate population if you view it from that perspective. It's strictly beneficial to staff. But let's be honest, we don't do solitary confinement. So having said that, we do things like isolation, which is needed, and we can explain why, or restorative housing. Hey, you know what? This inmate's acting up. 1, let's hold him accountable. Let's take stuff away from him. 2, let's get him away from the population right now because he's a danger. But 3, what are we going to do to him to reintroduce him back to GP? That's the key. So when we sell our measures in effort to defend the practices that we know we need, we have to make sure we put a component in there that allows for us to address the inmate in a way that's beneficial for the inmate, but more importantly, in a way for the public to understand this is beyond just being punitive. This is beyond just safety and security. Because at the end of the day is, we have to promote something that's best for the inmate population. And in some cases, we may sadly have to sacrifice the rights of one, or what could be perceived as the rights of one, to benefit the population as a whole for a time being. But it's not really a sacrifice with that's going to last forever. It's a suspension so we can figure out what we need to do with that individual. So it's not indefinite. Usually there is a time frame where we have to figure this out. But I think when we make our efforts to commit to these practices and hold true to what we know works, which is some level of isolation here, because that's the key, we have to be able to find that isolation both as a punitive. Let's keep the punitive in there. Let's keep the safety and security, but we have to balance as it's not strictly punitive. It's also got this in it, which ultimately will supersede the punitive once the inmate chooses to go in the right direction. So granted, punitive and rehabilitation measures really dependent on what the inmate decides to do. It really is. I mean, we'll kick the punitive side in an effort to introduce a more controlled rehabilitative effort, maybe one-on-one, whatever's needed, but the inmate doesn't allow it, it's going to remain punitive, because punitive also allows for the safety and security side to exist. But once the inmate allows, like, hey, I'm enough of this, I need my visit backs, I need these things back, fine, now we can work in the right side, and now the punitive side lessens, safety and security still maintained, but we can focus on what we need to address whatever these impulsive natures these inmates have. But we have to learn to explain that at that level, because we want to keep our practices. We have to learn how the practices serve all measures. And also, I want to mention one other thing, Joe, when it comes to management. Don't sell just one side. Don't, put the punitive side in, but balance it with safety and security and rehabilitative efforts. Don't try to sell just the one side and minimize the other side, because that's not going to be fair either, because then people are just going to want that one side to exist. So we all need to get together at this point and define the balanced perspective of what it is that we're doing, and let people realize you think we're doing this to be solely punitive, and we're not. And this is what the long-term goal is. So a lot of the people from the public only see short-term. Us as a united front have to start explaining the long-term outcome, which is that rehabilitative side, if the inmate allows for that to happen. And I'm going to say that, if the inmate allows for that to happen. Joe, there's a lot there, Joe. So I would love your perspective on that.
Yeah, when it comes to rehabilitation, it's really up to the inmate. It's not up to us. All we can do is offer the tools. Unfortunately, you have offenders who learn their lessons quicker than others. Especially in a restorative housing environment. Some of them are repeat offenders and have to keep coming back, and at some point, they either get older or they get sick of the process. Hey, I'm sick of having my visits taken. I'm sick of having my telephone suspended. I'm sick of not being able to use my tablet. I'm sick of my commissary restriction. It's ultimately up to them, regardless whether, they want the rehabilitative support or not. I found lots of times that, having a chaplain walk through restorative housing, tends to kind of jumpstart the rehabilitation process. It may be small things. They may give them a Bible. They may have them do a Bible study course, just something to get their mind off of not only being in restorative housing, but doing something positive and productive for once in their life, instead of, fighting, stealing, whatever the case is. And for us, it's hard to find that correct balance because we deal with so many inmates at a time, to balance that safety and security with the restorative housing process and the rehabilitation process. Ultimately, like you said, it's ultimately up to the inmate when he decides that he's ready for a change in his life. We can't force that change. We can only offer the tools and the trades to kind of curtail his mindset. And when inmates come into the penitentiary, they're a creature of habit. They're used to doing what they're doing. They're used to doing their drugs. They're used to doing their stealing, gang banging, whatever the case is. Our job is to try to find a way to change their mindset, not so much their behavior, but their mindset, and help them, by giving them the tools to be a better individual, to put more emphasis on his kids that he has out there in the world that, he normally wouldn't think about because he's doing what he's doing. We give him the tools and the studies to be a better father, to be a better husband, and if it's a female institution, to be a better mother or be a better wife. We can offer all the tools, but it's ultimately up to the offender when they are ready to make that change. We can't make them turn the corner. They have to be able to turn that corner themselves.
You know what, Joe? That is so spot on. And actually what you said kind of leads into the next section, but because they kind of bleed together. And by the way, guys, when we give out bullets, they're kind of just highlights. Everything kind of just bleeds through. Usually most of these things are happening at once, all at one time. There's not a progressive order to it all. But some things may be more foundational than others. So if you don't have it, the other things can't exist. But this, I want to add, so we have supporting educational, vocational, therapeutic programs, et cetera, supporting the program side of things. Correctional officers play an active role in facilitating environments that encourage self-improvement and readiness for entry. So they assist with educational, vocational, therapeutic workshops, encourage inmates to set and achieve personal goals. I want to mention something. So even in this aspect here, support could just be getting them there. Inmates may not want to come out, and maybe custody may spend an extra minute with someone and try to, you got to come out, and these are the reasons. And it could be just some dialogue. And sometimes, even if the inmate doesn't want to do it, their respect for that officer, they may be willing to try. So sometimes that respect could establish the effort between the inmate wanting to go or not wanting to go, because here's Joe, doesn't really know the inmate that well. Joe tried, inmate doesn't go. But then here comes Officer Ganji, and Officer Ganji's worked with this inmate, and just the inmate's respect, you know, because maybe Officer Ganji gives this inmate a level of expectations that he's expecting the inmate to meet, and this inmate wants to meet them. He wants to meet those expectations, at least with Ganji, you know. And again, look who controls the dynamic of that relationship. It's Ganji. Ganji's not compromising anything for the inmate to meet those expectations. There's no exchange. This is not a negotiation. You know, this is just something that was established between him and that inmate because Ganji's a senior officer. The inmates worked with Ganji for a while, and they have this respect between each other. But I want to mention something. You know, some people say that whether it's the program or the programs that, you know, kind of create the change in the inmate, or whether, like Joe mentioned before, they either grow out of it or they just get annoyed. I'm going to say what Joe said. The latter comes first, and then we show support. I mean, that's just pretty much what it is. If the inmate's not ready, you can't force them to change. So with that said, you know, even with our role, we can help them, but I want people to make clear, wherever you are in corrections, you're not in control of the outcome. The inmate is. You can't get so blinded by the outcome that you erode your effort, because what my effort for Joe may not work because Joe's not ready, but my effort for Russ will work because Russ is ready. And if you get so focused on the outcome, you could easily say, well, you know what? Screw all inmates. This shit doesn't work because you're having a problem with Joe. You know, it doesn't work that way. You have to make sure that your efforts don't get eroded by the outcome, because then you will get disenfranchised. Even for our service providers, you are not responsible for the outcome. I'm going to say it right then and there. You are not responsible for the outcome. And for the agency, for the public at large, we are not responsible for the outcome. You know, we're not. I'm sorry. We'll get them there if they're willing to get there, but they're responsible for taking the wheel and getting there. And with the support of the educational, vocational, and therapeutic programs, one more thing before I get Joe started. This is from the correctional side, the correctional officer side. You have to believe that change can happen, which means that even if you have a problem with one inmate, that may not be all inmates, but even if you have a problem with separating that, the staff that do the job, maybe you could put your hope in them. You got to put your hope somewhere, because eventually if you put your hope in staff and you know that they're dedicated, the hope will translate to the inmates. Maybe we've been looking at it wrong. Maybe I'm sitting here thinking, you know what? I got to believe every inmate can change. So I'll put my hope on the inmate. And here they are. They're falling back and my hope starts to erode. Well, maybe at first I'm putting my hope in the wrong spot. Maybe I should put my hope towards the staff because I work with them. I see how dedicated they are. And if anybody could do it, it has to be them. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting my hope in them. And that will help me deal with the challenges, because I can trust in my staff more at this point when it comes to creating change than I could with the inmate receiving it. So maybe what I'll do is I'll shift my trust over to staff, and I'll go through the challenge with them, because I get challenged too. I get it. I can relate to them. You know, not every inmate wants change or is worthy of change, but we still try, and I get it. So there's a mutual connection here that will help me now begin to see hope, and then I can go ahead and hopefully, be empowered by the hope to now go ahead and make my effort and my part of the rehabilitation process. But I will say this, for the staff that are watching this, there could be some staff that may not have that hope, and I get it. I'm going to tell you to shift where you look. If you may not directly find it from the inmate population at first, so look around, you look at the people that are doing it. But one thing we should have said earlier that is foundational here, that is required, is you have to believe that people can change. Because if you don't, you're not going to be successful at playing this new role that may be required from us because we have more interaction. Now, Joe, I know there's a lot there, and this is the perspective that we have to sell now, because this is where we are headed, and we want people to be invested in it. They have to see their part, but more importantly, they have to believe in their part.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And in order to help somebody change their habits or change their mindset, you have to believe in that. You have to have buy-in. Oddly enough, in my career, I found that inmates that were serving lengthy sentences, and I'm talking like, from 30 years to life, were more open to change and doing better for themselves than, the offender who's serving 2 to 5, somebody who's got short time. You run across some mindsets with, man, I'm not trying to hear any of this shit. Man, just get away from me with that bullshit, because I'm fixing to be out in 18 months and I'm going to just go do my thing. And, then you have an inmate who's doing 30 to life, who's been in the penitentiary for 25 years already. And, this is the one that's doing college studies in his cell, trying to get degrees, trying to, do what he can for himself, and their mindset is, I'm going to be here for a long haul. So why shouldn't I do something that's going to make me better, that's going to give me better tools, something that my family can be proud of, versus the short timer who, he's not going to be there long enough for the rehabilitation, the therapeutic, or the educational to really change him, unless when they come in the door, they're wanting to change. And, I find that your younger adults aren't adaptive to that until they grow older. I find that your middle-aged inmates are at that point where they're tired of repeating the process of coming to jail, coming to prison. It's all about mindset. And you have to kind of recognize and understand that before you can actually pitch the idea. Well, you're going to be here for, 2 to 5. You're here for burglary of vehicles or stealing vehicles. Why not look into a vocational program where you can fix them? Have something you can do when you get out other than, collect felonies. It's all in the way that you pitch it, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that some people are willing to change, some people are ready to change, and some people will change. And you got to be able to recognize what level that they're at. Not all staff can, not all the teachers can. The teachers that are there doing these educational, vocational, and therapeutic programs are always, already in the mindset that, I'm here to help change. I want to save everybody that I can. It doesn't always happen, but their mindset's already there, because that's what they're there to do. They came, they could be a teacher, a vocational teacher anywhere other than a prison facility. They're there for a purpose. So with them being there for a purpose, staff, the correctional staff need to recognize that, they're there trying to solve the recidivism problem. They're trying to change the culture of the facility, to help, promote a positive change, try to make people better for themselves. And, that's something that the COs have to start buying into. I mean, the days of 20 and 30 years ago are gone. This is where we're at now, and this is something that they need to support. They need to find what their niche is, try to get them gravitated towards that niche, and, start the process. And, the sooner the better. But like I said, not everybody's open to changing their mindset right away. Sometimes it does take time. Like I said, getting older, you tend to realize certain things that you missed out on an opportunity of, as being a young adult.
Right. And I want to mention something too. I think the key here that me and Joe are definitely getting at is that corrections has made a shift. And with that said, where is the effort from the correctional officer best applied when it comes to this side of the coin, the rehabilitative side? So again, your effort is, maybe, taking some time to try to, get the person in the right direction, but ultimately they are in charge of that outcome. And granted, guys, the people on the rehabilitative side, they definitely should know what custody does, because their world in corrections is pretty much defined by that custodial existence. So they know, what's expected of them. But when we work as correctional officers inside, this is our community, it would be great for us to know what the community offers. So we know how best to translate those offers where it works best for us, even when it comes to safety and security, because rehabilitation and safety and security are intertwined. They definitely do bleed into each other. So it's good for us to know and see that as a resource. So the more we're familiar with what these other programs offer, the more we may be able to play that to our benefit. Okay, Joe, so that brings us to I got two last parts here. This is kind of what we're talking about here, but preparing inmates for reentry. So when correctional officers invest in inmate growth, they contribute to reduced recidivism, safer communities, and a more positive facility culture. I believe the last aspect matters, the more positive facility culture, because you know what's funny? Back in the day, I think that we had those interactions, but we weren't so, we didn't want to be noticed. So we were a little bit more hesitant. Maybe we even try to avoid it because we thought our peers would judge us as being soft, as I mentioned before. But now I think when we know that's the way to go, as long as it's controlled, we don't have to apologize for those interactions. We're supposed to be doing those interactions. It could open up the door to a more positive, influential working environment. As I said, I've seen people that when they retire or whatever, you ask them what was the most impactful part of their lives, and they may tell you an interaction with an inmate, but then they're quickly either going to apologize for it or they'll say, but by the way, I wasn't corrupt. It's like you don't need an excuse to have a positive interaction. So I think when we note this and we note that this is a good direction to be in, it's like we're kind of giving people permission to have a positive impact, which they never needed before, but for some reason they thought they did. So now it's like, guys, you're supposed to. So maybe we have to reintroduce this idea of giving them permission only because they may not realize that they're supposed to. And then eventually they may realize that the permission was never warranted. But that is our role. Would you agree with that, Joe? And that does relate to a stronger reentry process.
Yeah, it does. I mean, we all have impacts of some sort, on the offender population. That they carry with them, into the free world, that, something they can look back on and remember that, somebody either treated me as a human, somebody gave me the chance to better myself, whatever the case is. And, and you're absolutely right. It was like, 20, 30 years ago, we had to have permission to say that, hey, this inmate, saw me in the free world, come up and shook my hand and thanked me for, being a firm, fair, and consistent person to him. And, it was like you were seen as weak if you even discussed that kind of topic. It was weird comparative to today where, more and more, people are kind of opening up about their experiences. The one time that they did make a positive impact on an inmate or an offender or, a jail inmate, whatever. I think it's becoming more of a cultural norm than it was.
And Joe, I think that was also maybe self-induced. I think that corrections operated on extremes. If you talk to an inmate, you're welcoming undue. And if you don't talk, that's the way you need to be. It's like, no, guys, never once are you trained not to have interactions with inmates. Don't subjectively interpret universal precaution as you don't communicate. You have to communicate, but you have to make sure you have control of what's being expressed. So with that said, yes, I believe that we would have a bigger impact if we would really know what that role is and then understand it as that we are going to engage, we are going to interact, and I want to make sure that each interaction at some level is impactful with that layer of control. So the control is always going to be in the backdrop. The last one I got, Joe, is the long-term impact of officer-partnered rehabilitation. Here's what was funny about this, Joe. I actually had officer-led participation because I thought of safety security being foundational and make it officer-led. But we talked about keeping the scale balanced. We already know what the foundation is. It's safety and security. So basically make sure it's partnered with the service provider. So I said when correctional officers invest in inmate growth, they contribute to reduced recidivism. So there's the contribution, safer communities, and more positive facility culture. I think I think this is quick. I think if we create an environment where the interactions are positive, are impactful, they're not negative. You don't want that to be the only interaction you have with inmates is negative. You want it to have some level of controlled, positive expectation. I mean, what's funny is if I'm in school and the principal calls me, my stomach starts to turn because the only time I see the principal is when it's negative. Maybe the principal should balance things out where, if they do call me, my initial impression is not always going to be, it's got to be something negative. Same thing with, I want to say in corrections, if the officer needs to speak to you, the inmate should not have to feel that dialogue is going to be negative. In some cases, maybe, and this may be too extreme, but we could borrow from this extreme and just break it down a little bit, is maybe the inmate could even at some level want the dialogue, look forward to the dialogue. Is that realistically optimistic? I don't know, but it's something that I think gives us a roadmap, a destination. Doesn't mean the inmate will get there, but it's a good roadmap. But I think that the dialogue should be something that could express or translate into the real world. So the inmate knows that not every interaction is going to be a negative interaction. So if that's all I'm having behind the wall, and that's all I'm used to, then maybe when I get out in the real world, not giving them an excuse, but hear me out, I expect the same type of interactions. I expect the negativity because that's all I know. Every time someone wants to speak to me, it's because I'm doing something wrong. And, are we balancing it with telling them when they're doing something right to keep them motivated? I think at the end of the day, that's the key. I think that sometimes, I know this may sound crazy, but sometimes a strong impact can connect better when a strong positive impact can connect better when they have things that are going good in their lives as opposed to things that are going negative. So granted, when they're in jail or in their prison, things are going negative. So now we're already connected into the negativity. So of course they don't want to deal with us because we're connected into when their life is going negative. But what about if they decide to make a change and they just graduated from college? Or would it graduate from high school, whatever it is, inside the prison system? I don't think there's nothing wrong with an officer noticing that and saying, hey, congratulations. I heard you just got your degree. I know it wasn't an easy thing. Good job. Great way to move forward. Now you start connecting to the positive experiences. Now it's no longer correctional officers are, only there when I do something wrong, but rather, wow, you know what? Correctional Officer Smith, wow. And then when I graduated, I think he was the first person that came to me and said, job well done. And and it sets a powerful impact or a dynamic that we can actually use for our own benefit. They do something good, we connect with the positivity, and that could be something that could be truly impactful on the outside. Would you agree with that, Joe? I mean, that's just one example, but
yeah, and that was something that I did too as a lieutenant. We at one of my former units, we graduated a GED class every 6 months, and part of that process not only was the principals and the teachers, but some of the correctional staff also stood up and gave a support speech, because the inmates' families were there to watch them graduate, which I really thought was a good thing because it took away the stigma that all of us were from the public, that we were just total hard asses and didn't give a shit. We threw them in a cell and locked the key, threw the key away. It gave us a chance to, promote that positive image to the public and let them know that, hey, we're not just hard asses. We're here to be supportive as well. It gave ourselves an opportunity to kind of express support in ways that we otherwise usually wouldn't. And, see the inmate population who were in these programs that were graduating kind of felt a positive nudge that, they generally didn't get either from their family, their siblings, wife, son, daughter, whatever. They were getting that positive push. And that, in turn, that kind of made them want to do things better for themselves, because for once somebody's seen a positive aspect in their lives and kind of promoted it, not so much exploited it, but promoted it and made them realize that, hey, that dude was actually kind of proud that I graduated this class. So there's positive attributes to it all.
I like what you said, Joe. It's not that we're looking to exploit, we're looking to create momentum.
Yeah,
because they never had momentum in that direction before. So we got to keep that momentum fueled. And guys, exploiting it, people think that's the case. It's not. We're doing it for the inmates' benefit, so they could stay motivated and try this. Because at the end of the day, they're used to doing things the opposite way, because that's where the support comes from. You rob a car and you get the respect of your peers. You go to high school. That's not what we want you to do. So with that said, now we put them in the right track, but we have to keep them motivated, because at any point, each step forward until they discover their way is hard. So you push them and you push them and you push them until they get to where they got to be, so they self-sustain. And I think, our efforts play out. The outcome on them, but our efforts could play out to keep them motivated. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing? I thought this was a good dialogue, a needed dialogue.
Yeah, it was good. It was great dialogue. Public needs to realize that, we're at a juncture in the corrections profession now that things are leaning towards more of the real rehabilitative, and I'd say even the rehabilitative side for mental health people. We're at that juncture now. We're at that point in time, that we have the technology to help support rehabilitation. We have more staff on board. Agencies have created a rehabilitation side specifically just for rehabilitation. The agencies are becoming, more aware and understanding that there's a higher need for rehabilitation than there is to, more than just safety and security. And hopefully the public will understand that, we're not there just to keep them in the fence. Of course, it's one of our most primary and most important roles is to keep them there. But just equally as important, it's important that we give them the tools to succeed once they get out, to be that better father, be that better husband, be that better employee. Because I've had guys come to jail that their bosses are calling up, hey man, when is this dude getting out? He's a jam up employee. He busts his ass. I need him back at work. And to receive calls like that from people's employers that these guys were actually hard workers. Some of them made bad choices, went to a party and did something he wasn't supposed to, smoked something he wasn't supposed to, tried something he wasn't supposed to. People are there for making bad decisions. Sometimes it's a one-off and sometimes it's habitual. It's our job to kind of recognize which one is which, and, the ones that are ready for the change, it's our job to prioritize that and get them to the front of the line and help them in the process where they can help themselves to be a better individual. So hopefully the public understands that, we are pushing to make these individuals better. We're not there just to lock them up and throw away the key, to keep them in the cage. We are actually, trying to help these guys better themselves. And, I just hope that, the public has now viewing this will have a better interaction and a better insight as to what we actually do.
And Joe, that's the center of this whole dialogue. I couldn't say it better myself. The key here is first for us to find our importance and to be able to translate that importance to the public. That's it. What's funny is some may even pride ourselves on the harder side of corrections for whatever reason. But I don't think we've really even been in that business for the last 40, 50 years. I think we've already been balanced out, and the initiatives that are being put in play, we've already done, just more in the shadows. Now it's just more of pushing it into existence so the public could see, because they have more eyes on us now. There's more access to what we do behind the wall than there ever was before. So with that said, we have to be able to translate what we do, and depends on who you're talking to. It's still the same thing, but if I'm translating what we do to the public, I'm going to look for the benefit that what people could see as the softer side, I see as more as the human side. And if I'm translating it to, the law enforcement side or the side where there's the greatest liability for protective measures, I'm going to translate it on the more of the safety and security side. You got to know your audience, and you got to know how to adjust and adapt to what the audience is expecting to hear. And it could be a balance of both, but sometimes you may have to really sell out one point to bring out the other. So, like if I'm pushing for, my safety and security side, I may have to sell the rehabilitation effort. And if I'm talking to an audience like today, where I need to sell the rehabilitative side, I'm going to push the safety and security aspect. You just got to know how to, like what me and Joe did, adapt and adjust to your audience, but the meaning and context, it doesn't change. It's still the same thing. It holds weight. It's just, you got to know where their priority is and how to adjust your argument based on their priority to meet the middle ground. So as always, guys, the show is TWF, and please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.